Nora Morgan stood frozen in her kitchen, phone trembling in her hand, the world around her warping like glass in a kiln. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched the live feed from her home security camera. Her husband Derek's laughter echoed through the tiny speaker, followed by the unmistakable voice of her best friend Vanessa, asking if he wanted another dance. The phone nearly slipped from Nora's grip when Vanessa stepped into frame, wearing nothing but one of Nora's silk scarves draped across her shoulders. Nora's thumb hovered over the power button, begging her brain for mercy, for darkness, for anything but this. Yet she couldn't look away as her husband of 11 years reached for her best friend of 17. "They think I'm in Chicago," Nora whispered to the empty break room. Her business trip, the pharmaceutical conference that Derek had encouraged her to attend, that Vanessa had helped her pack for, wasn't scheduled to end until tomorrow. The betrayal wasn't just the nakedness, or the dancing, or even the hungry look in Derek's eyes. It was the casual intimacy between them, the easy laughter, the way Vanessa knew exactly where the good wine glasses were kept. This wasn't their first dance. Nora's phone buzzed with a text notification that slid down from the top of her screen, momentarily interrupting the video feed. It was from Vanessa's mother, Sandra. "We're so excited for Sunday dinner. Robert is bringing his famous potato salad. What can we bring?" Sunday dinner. The monthly tradition Nora had started 3 years ago to help Vanessa reconnect with her estranged parents. The dinner Nora had convinced Derek to host, even though he always complained about Sandra's judgmental comments and Robert's political rants. Something clicked in Nora's mind then. A terrible, perfect idea that unfurled like a poisonous flower. Her fingers, steady now, typed a response. "Just yourselves. I have something special planned. 3 years earlier." "I don't understand why we need to host Vanessa's parents," Derek said, tossing salad with more force than necessary. "They don't even like her, let alone us." Nora adjusted the flower arrangement on the dining table, making sure the lilies, Sandra's favorites, were prominently displayed. "They're trying, Derek, and Vanessa needs this. You know how much it hurt her when they cut her off after she dropped out of law school." "Yeah, to pursue dancing, which she's incredible at. Did you see the review of her contemporary piece in the Tribune last month?" "Of course I did. I was at the performance, remember?" Nora smiled, remembering the way Vanessa had transformed on stage, her body telling stories that words never could. "And that's why this dinner is important. They need to see she made the right choice." Derek came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "You're a good friend. But if Robert starts in about how real men vote Republican again, I'm hiding in the garage." Nora laughed, leaning into his embrace. "Deal." The first dinner had been tense, Sandra picking at her food while making comments about proper careers, and Robert dominating the conversation with monologues about responsibility. But by the third dinner, Sandra had asked about Vanessa's next performance, and by the sixth, Robert had awkwardly admitted that the video Vanessa had sent them of her latest piece was pretty impressive for dancing. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And Nora had been the architect of that reconciliation, the steady hand guiding Vanessa's family back together. Piece by jagged piece. 2 years earlier, "I think Derek is having an affair." Nora looked up from her laptop, startled by Vanessa's sudden announcement. They were having their weekly coffee at Vanessa's apartment, a tradition they'd maintained since college. "What? Why would you think that?" Vanessa tucked her legs underneath her on the couch, her dancer's flexibility making the awkward position look graceful. "The signs are all there, Nor. The late nights at work. The sudden interest in his appearance. He bought 3 new shirts last month. He got a promotion," Nora said, closing her laptop. "He needs to look the part of marketing director. He's been checking his phone constantly. When we had dinner last week, he excused himself twice to take calls." Vanessa's eyes were wide with concern. "I don't want to be right about this, but you're not," Nora said firmly. "Derek wouldn't cheat on me." Vanessa reached across the coffee table to squeeze Nora's hand. "I hope I'm wrong. I really do. But I love you too much not to say something if I'm worried." That night, Nora had watched Derek more closely, the way he angled his phone away when texting, how he'd grown distant during their evening routines. For 3 days, she'd battled paranoia, checking his shirts for unfamiliar perfume, scanning their credit card statement for unexplained charges. On the 4th day, she'd broken down and checked his phone while he was in the shower. The suspicious text messages turned out to be about a surprise weekend getaway he was planning for their anniversary. The late nights were him working overtime to afford the luxury cabin he'd booked. Nora had felt ridiculous, ashamed of her suspicion. When she told Vanessa about the planned surprise, ruined now by her snooping, her friend had been genuinely thrilled for her, showing no signs of disappointment that her theory had been wrong. "Thank God," Vanessa had said, hugging Nora tightly. "I would have hunted the homewrecker down myself 18 months earlier." "I can't believe your dance studio is finally happening," Nora said, helping Vanessa hang mirrors on the freshly painted walls of her new space. The studio was small but flooded with natural light from the wall of windows facing the street. "I can't believe your pharmaceutical patent got approved in the same month," Vanessa replied, carefully measuring the distance between mounting brackets. "We should do something epic to celebrate. Vegas? God, remember Vegas after graduation? You nearly got us arrested trying to sneak into that VIP area." Nora laughed, handing Vanessa another bracket. "And you talked our way out of it with that ridiculous story about being foreign royalty." Vanessa grinned. "Your negotiation skills have always been your superpower." "I'm just glad my superpower helped secure funding for the compound. This medication could change lives." Nora stepped back, admiring their work. "The mirrors look perfect." "So does your life," Vanessa said, wrapping an arm around Nora's shoulders. "Successful career, gorgeous husband who adores you, this amazing friendship with an up-and-coming dance studio owner." Nora smiled, but something in her chest tightened. Her life did look perfect from the outside. Successful career, stable marriage, beautiful home. Yet lately, she'd felt a growing distance between her and Derek. They moved through their routines like actors hitting their marks, but the spontaneity, the hunger they'd once had for each other, had faded. "Derek and I are thinking about starting a family," Nora said suddenly, the words surprising even herself. They'd discussed it abstractly, but there had been no concrete plans. Vanessa's eyes widened. "Really? That's huge." "Yeah," Nora nodded, committing to the lie. "I think we're ready." "You'll be amazing parents," Vanessa said, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. 1 year earlier, Vanessa's dance studio had become a local success, with enrollment growing every month. Her parents now attended her showcases, though Sandra still occasionally made comments about real jobs with benefits. The monthly family dinners continued, now with the addition of Vanessa's younger brother Michael, who had recently moved back to the city after college. "You've changed our family," Sandra told Nora one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. "Before these dinners, I hadn't spoken to my daughter in almost 2 years." "Vanessa did all the hard work," Nora replied, wrapping leftovers. "She's the one who kept showing up even when it was uncomfortable." "But you created the space for reconciliation," Sandra insisted. "Robert and I were too stubborn to make the first move, and Vanessa was too hurt. You built the bridge we all needed." Later that night, after everyone had left, Nora found Derek in his home office, the blue light of his computer screen illuminating his face. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him work. When had they started spending their evenings in separate rooms? "Sandra thanked me for fixing their family," she said. Derek looked up, his eyes taking a moment to focus on her. "You did fix them. You're good at fixing things." "Not everything," she said quietly. He held her gaze for a long moment, then looked back at his screen. "I've got to finish this proposal. We'll talk tomorrow." But they didn't talk tomorrow, or the day after. The conversation hovered between them, unacknowledged, as they moved through their increasingly separate lives. 6 months earlier. "Have you noticed Derek acting different lately?" Vanessa asked, stretching on the floor of her studio after hours. Nora sat against the mirrored wall, watching her friend's impossible flexibility with familiar envy. Different how? Nora asked, though a catalog of changes immediately flashed through her mind. More gym visits, new clothes, a sudden interest in cooking that had never existed before, the distinct feeling that he was performing for an audience that wasn't her. Vanessa shrugged, transitioning smoothly into a split. Just happier? More engaged? Last week, when I stopped by to drop off those contract templates for your review, he actually put down his phone and asked about the studio. She switched legs in the split. It was weird. Maybe he's finally taking my advice to be more present, Nora said, but a cold feeling settled in her stomach. Derek hadn't been more present with her. Quite the opposite. Maybe, Vanessa agreed. Or maybe he's finally appreciating what he has. You're kind of a catch, Dr. Morgan. Some of us would kill for what you have. Nora smiled weakly. A workaholic husband who forgets my birthday? A partner, Vanessa said, her voice suddenly serious. Someone who chooses you every day. There was something raw in Vanessa's expression that made Nora look away. They'd had variations of this conversation before. Vanessa lamenting her string of failed relationships, Nora reassuring her that she'd find someone. But this felt different, heavier somehow. How are things with that architect you were seeing, Tom? Nora asked, deliberately changing the subject. Tim, Vanessa corrected, standing up and reaching for her water bottle. And he's history. Turns out I'm not serious relationship material. His words, not mine. He's an idiot, Nora said automatically. Vanessa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Maybe. Or maybe he saw something in me that I don't want to see. She took a long drink of water, then added, Not everyone gets the happy ending you have. Nor. Some of us have to make our own happiness. 3 months earlier. Nora came home early from work to find Derek cooking in the kitchen, something that had become a more frequent occurrence. The house smelled of garlic and wine, and for a moment, it felt like the early days of their marriage when they'd make elaborate meals together on weekends. You're home, Derek said, looking genuinely pleased to see her. I'm trying that risotto recipe from the cooking class. Cooking class? Nora set down her bag, frowning. What cooking class? Derek froze momentarily, then continued stirring. Did I not mention it? The community center has this couples cooking series on Thursday nights. I signed us up, but you had that conference call last week, so I went alone. And the week before that? Nora asked, a familiar suspicion creeping back in. I mentioned it, Nor. You said you were too tired. He looked hurt, which only irritated her more. Had he mentioned it? Lately, their communication consisted mostly of text messages, coordinating schedules, and quick conversations before bed. It was possible he had told her and she'd forgotten, or only half heard him. Who else was there? She asked, trying to keep her voice casual as she poured herself a glass of wine. Couples from the neighborhood, mostly. The Petersons. That new family from down the street. He tasted the risotto, added more pepper. Actually, I ran into Vanessa there. She's been taking the class to learn healthier recipes for her dancers? Vanessa, Nora repeated, the name sitting strangely in her mouth. You and Vanessa are taking a cooking class together. Derek finally looked up, his expression open and unconcerned. Not together. We just happened to be in the same class. She drove me home last week since you had the car. He smiled. She says hi, by the way, and she wants your opinion on new costumes for the winter showcase. The explanation was perfectly reasonable. The hurt Nora felt was not. The risotto smells amazing, she said finally, pushing away her discomfort. Can I help with anything? 1 month earlier. I need to ask you something, Nora said, sitting on Vanessa's couch after helping her friend move furniture for an upcoming studio event. And I need you to be completely honest with me. Vanessa sat down beside her, concern immediately crossing her features. Of course. What's wrong? Are you and Derek? Nora couldn't finish the question, the words sticking in her throat. Vanessa's eyes widened. Am I and Derek what? Having an affair? Nora, no. God, no. How could you even think that? The immediate denial should have been reassuring. But something in Vanessa's expression, a flicker of something that looked almost like guilt, kept Nora's suspicion alive. You've been spending a lot of time with him. The cooking class. You drove him home. Last week he mentioned you helped him pick out a gift for my birthday. Because he's hopeless at gifts and you're my best friend, Vanessa said, taking Nora's hands in hers. I love you. I would never betray you like that. Nora wanted desperately to believe her. It's just, things have been off between us. And then suddenly he's making all this effort, but it doesn't feel like it's for me. Have you talked to him about how you're feeling? We don't really talk anymore, Nora admitted. Not about anything important. Vanessa squeezed her hands. Then start there. Tell him you need more. Derek loves you, Nora. I've seen the way he looks at you. Nora nodded, feeling simultaneously reassured and troubled. I'm sorry I accused you. I know you wouldn't do that to me. Never, Vanessa said firmly. You're the most important person in my life. You saved my relationship with my family. You helped me start my studio. I owe you everything. On the drive home, Nora thought about Vanessa's words. There had been no hesitation, no defensive anger at the accusation. Just immediate reassurance and concern. She was being paranoid, letting the distance in her marriage create monsters where there were none. Vanessa was right. She needed to talk to Derek, to bridge the gap that had formed between them before it became uncrossable. 2 weeks earlier, I think we should see a marriage counselor, Nora said over dinner, the words she'd been rehearsing for days finally spilling out. Derek set down his fork, his expression unreadable. Is it that bad? It feels like we're roommates, she said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. Good roommates who occasionally have sex, but still just sharing space, not sharing a life. Derek was quiet for a long moment, looking down at his plate. I thought things were getting better, he said finally. I've been trying, Nora. The cooking, the date nights. I know you have, she acknowledged. But it feels performative. Like you're checking boxes rather than really being present. That's not fair, he said, a defensive edge entering his voice. I can't win with you. I don't try enough, you're unhappy. I try harder, and it's performative. I don't want to fight, Nora said, feeling the conversation slipping away from her. I just want us to be honest about where we are. Where are we then? He challenged. Since you seem to have it all figured out. The hurt in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't how she'd imagined the conversation going. In her rehearsals, he'd been receptive, equally concerned about the state of their marriage. I don't know, she admitted. That's why I think we need help. Someone objective who can help us figure out if this is just a rough patch or something else. Derek pushed his plate away. So you've already decided our marriage might be over. Great. That's not what I said, Nora protested. But Derek was already standing up, taking his plate to the kitchen. I have an early meeting tomorrow, he said, his back to her as he rinsed his dish. Let's talk about this another time. But Nora knew another time might never come. They'd mastered the art of avoidance, of pushing difficult conversations into a hypothetical future that never arrived. Derek, she tried one more time, I love you. I want us to fix this. He turned then, his expression softening slightly. I know, I love you too. It's just not a good time right now. It never was. 1 week earlier, the annual pharmaceutical conference couldn't have come at a better time. 3 days in Chicago, away from the tension at home, focusing on her work instead of her crumbling marriage. Derek had encouraged her to go, had even helped her pack, which she'd chosen to see as thoughtfulness rather than eagerness to have her gone. I'll check in on Vanessa's studio event while you're away, he'd offered as he drove her to the airport. She mentioned needing help with the lighting setup. That's nice of you, Nora had said, ignoring the twinge of discomfort. Her earlier suspicions had faded somewhat after her conversation with Vanessa, but hadn't disappeared entirely. Still, she trusted her best friend, and despite their problems, she wanted to believe in her husband too. The first 2 days of the conference had been productive. Her presentation on the new compound well received, networking connections established that could benefit her research. She'd called Derek each night, their conversations polite but distant, discussing nothing more substantial than the weather and conference highlights. On the third day, her workshop had ended early, giving her an unexpected free afternoon. On impulse, she'd booked an earlier flight home, planning to surprise Derek and perhaps use the unexpected time together to reopen their tabled conversation about counseling. As her rideshare approached their neighborhood, Nora had opened the home security app on her phone, a habit she'd developed while traveling to check that everything was as it should be. The living room camera showed nothing unusual at first, just their empty sofa and coffee table. Then she heard voices, laughter. Derek walked into frame carrying 2 wine glasses, followed by Vanessa. "Is this a private show or can anyone watch?" Derek's voice came through the small speaker, teasing and intimate in a way he hadn't spoken to Nora in months. Vanessa's laugh was low, suggestive. "Depends on how appreciative the audience is." Nora's finger hovered over the button to close the app, but froze when Vanessa said, "Want another dance? A proper one this time?" Then Vanessa stepped fully into frame, naked except for Nora's silk scarf, the dark blue one Derek had given her for their 10th anniversary, draped across her shoulders. Nora had the driver take her to a hotel instead of home. She needed time to think, to breathe, to process the evidence of betrayal playing on loop in her mind. She sat on the edge of the generic hotel bed, still in her conference clothes, phone clutched in her hand, alternating between numbness and nauseating waves of rage and hurt. It wasn't just the betrayal that cut so deep. It was the particular cruelty of who had betrayed her. Derek, her husband of 11 years, the man who'd promised to love and honor her, and Vanessa, who knew every intimate detail of Nora's life. Her insecurities about her marriage, her deepest fears about not being enough. Vanessa, who Nora had defended to her judgmental parents, who she'd helped financially when the dance studio was struggling, who she'd comforted through countless breakups and rejections. Vanessa, who had looked her in the eye and promised she would never betray her that way. When her phone buzzed with Sandra's text about Sunday dinner, something had shifted in Nora's mind. The monthly dinners she'd orchestrated to heal Vanessa's family had become a tradition, one that Derek complained about but participated in for Nora's sake. Vanessa's parents, especially Sandra, still carried their conservative disappointment in their daughter's choices, their grudging acceptance of her dance career fragile and conditional. They would be horrified to see their daughter now. Just yourselves. "I have something special planned." After sending the reply, Nora had opened her contacts and called a lawyer her company had used for patent work, a sharp-eyed woman with a reputation for ruthlessness in divorce cases. Then she'd called her bank and transferred half of their joint savings to a new individual account. Finally, she'd ordered room service and a bottle of wine and methodically begun to plan her revenge. The next morning, Nora went home as if returning from her conference on schedule. Derek greeted her with a quick kiss and asked about her trip, showing no signs of guilt or discomfort. She answered his questions with practiced ease, describing panels that hadn't happened and conversations that had never taken place. All the while, she watched him, the way he maintained comfortable eye contact, how he seemed genuinely interested in her fictional conference, adventures. He was a better actor than she'd given him credit for. "I confirmed with Sandra about dinner on Sunday," she said casually as they prepared for bed that night. "Her potato salad comment made me think we should do a comfort food theme." "Sounds good," Derek said, not looking up from his phone. "Though I think these dinners have served their purpose. Vanessa and her parents seem fine now." "One more won't hurt," Nora replied, her voice steady despite the rage burning beneath her skin. "I've put a lot of effort into healing their family. I'd like to see it through." Derek glanced up then, his expression softening. "You're a good friend." "Vanessa's lucky to have you." The irony nearly made her laugh. Instead, she smiled and said, "I know." The next day, Nora called Vanessa, inviting her to lunch, something that would have been routine before, but now required every ounce of Nora's self-control. They met at their usual cafe, Vanessa arriving late and slightly flustered, her hair damp from a morning shower after teaching. Sorry I'm late, she said, sliding into the seat across from Nora. The beginner class ran over. These kids have no concept of time. No problem, Nora said, studying her friend's face for signs of guilt. For any indication that less than 48 hours ago, she had been naked in Nora's living room with Nora's husband. There was nothing. No nervous avoidance of eye contact, no unusual behavior. Just the same Vanessa she'd known for 17 years, stealing a sip of Nora's latte before ordering her own. How was the conference? Did your presentation kill? Vanessa asked, removing her light jacket to reveal a tank top that showed off the toned arms developed through years of dance. It went well, Nora said, reciting the same fictional highlights she'd given Derek. Though I'm glad to be home. I missed everything. Vanessa's smile was warm, uncomplicated by deceit. We missed you too. Derek and I were just saying yesterday how quiet things are when you're gone. Yesterday, when they'd been in Nora's house drinking her wine, betraying her trust. Speaking of, Nora said, keeping her voice casual, I was thinking of doing something special for Sunday's dinner. A slideshow or something to celebrate how far we've all come. You? Your parents? That's sweet, Vanessa said, though she looked slightly alarmed. But you know how my mom gets about public displays of emotion. She might spontaneously combust. Nothing too sentimental, Nora assured her. Just a nice reminder of the journey. I have some great photos from the early dinners, Vanessa relaxed. In that case, I'm sure they'd love it. Mom was just saying the other day how grateful she is that you brought us all back together. That's what friends do, Nora said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. They show up for each other, no matter what. Confrontations. Sunday arrived with the crisp clarity of early fall, the kind of perfect day that seemed cruelly at odds with Nora's internal storm. She spent the morning preparing for dinner, marinating chicken, chopping vegetables, setting the dining room table with their best dishes. Derek offered to help, but she declined, preferring to work alone with her thoughts and plans. By 5 o'clock, everything was ready. The house smelled of roasting meat and herbs, the table was set for 5, and the living room TV, visible from the dining area through the open floor plan, was on, displaying a paused image of Vanessa's dance studio logo, the first slide of what appeared to be a simple photo presentation. Looks nice, Derek commented, coming downstairs in a freshly ironed shirt. You went all out. It might be our last one for a while, Nora replied, smoothing the tablecloth. I thought we should make it special. Derek raised an eyebrow. Last one? I have that research trip to Boston next month, remember? And then the holidays. Right. He nodded, accepting the explanation without question. The doorbell rang at 5:30 exactly. Sandra and Robert were always punctual. Nora greeted them with warm hugs, accepting the bottle of wine Robert had brought and the small container of Sandra's potato salad. They made small talk in the living room, Sandra commenting on Nora's new throw pillows, Robert discussing the unseasonably warm weather. At 5:45, Vanessa arrived, bringing a store-bought cheesecake and apologies for her lateness. Traffic was horrible, she explained, kissing her parents' cheeks and then giving Nora a quick hug. She nodded at Derek but didn't approach him, a careful distance that, in retrospect, seemed more calculated than casual. Dinner began smoothly, the conversation flowing between safe topics: Sandra's garden club, Robert's golf game, Vanessa's upcoming winter showcase. Nora participated minimally, watching the interactions with detached interest, like an anthropologist observing a foreign cultural ritual. As they finished the main course, Nora stood and began clearing plates. I thought we could have dessert in the living room tonight. I've put together a little presentation to celebrate our journey as a family. Oh, Nora, you shouldn't have gone to the trouble, Sandra said, though she looked pleased by the suggestion. It's no trouble, Nora assured her, carrying dishes to the kitchen while Derek helped arrange the living room seating for optimal viewing of the TV. Vanessa followed Nora into the kitchen, offering to help with coffee. You're being weird, Vanessa whispered as they arranged cups on a tray. Are you okay? Just tired, Nora replied, not meeting her friend's eyes. The conference took more out of me than I expected. Back in the living room, everyone settled with their dessert plates and coffee cups. Nora remained standing, remote control in hand, facing her audience. "Before we start," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I want to thank all of you for being part of this journey. These dinners have meant a lot to me, watching a family heal and grow closer." Sandra dabbed at her eyes. Robert looked uncomfortable but pleased, and Vanessa smiled gratefully at Nora. Derek, seated slightly apart from the others, watched his wife with a puzzled expression, as if trying to figure out why this particular dinner warranted such ceremony. "Family is built on trust," Nora continued. "On honesty, on respect. When those foundations are damaged, everything built upon them becomes unstable." She paused, meeting each person's eyes briefly before continuing. "I learned that lesson this week in a particularly painful way." The room grew still, the atmosphere shifting from comfortable to wary. Vanessa set down her coffee cup, a small furrow appearing between her brows. "Nora?" Derek said, his voice carrying a warning note. "Maybe we should just enjoy dessert." "I thought I was coming home to an empty house on Thursday," Nora said, ignoring him. "My flight got in early and I was checking our security camera, a habit I developed while traveling." She raised the remote. "This is what I saw." She pressed play. The studio logo disappeared, replaced by footage from their living room security camera, the same room they were all sitting in now. The timestamp showed 2:34 p.m. on Thursday. The room was empty for a moment, then Derek walked into frame carrying 2 wine glasses. Vanessa followed, laughing at something he'd said. "Is this a private show, or can anyone watch?" Derek's voice rang clearly through the TV speakers. Beside her, Nora felt rather than saw Derek go rigid. On the couch, Vanessa made a small choked sound. "Depends on how appreciative the audience is," Vanessa's recorded voice replied. Sandra set down her dessert plate with a sharp clatter. "What is this?" "Just watch," Nora said quietly. "It gets better." On screen, Vanessa asked if Derek wanted another dance, then stepped fully into frame. The security camera's angle was high enough to capture her full nudity. The blue silk scarf draped provocatively across her shoulders, the only thing she wore. Sandra gasped. Robert sputtered into his coffee, and Vanessa lunged for the remote in Nora's hand. "Turn it off!" she hissed, but Nora stepped back, keeping the remote out of reach. "No," Nora said, her voice ice. "I think everyone should see the whole performance." "I did." On screen, Derek pulled Vanessa close, his hands tracing paths along her naked back as she began a slow, sensual dance against him. The audio captured their murmured endearments. The soft music playing in the background, Nora recognized it as a playlist she had created for their anniversary 2 years ago. "This is inappropriate," Robert said, standing abruptly, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Sandra, we're leaving." "Actually," Nora said, her voice cutting through the tension, "I think you should stay. After all, Vanessa is your daughter. Don't you want to see what she's been doing with her dance training? With my husband? In my home?" "Nora, please," Derek finally spoke, his voice strained. "This isn't what?" Nora turned to him, her composure finally cracking. "Isn't what it looks like? Because it looks like my husband and my best friend betraying me in the most intimate way possible. It looks like the 2 people I trusted most in the world making me into a fool. I told you to turn that off," Vanessa cried, tears streaming down her face as she made another grab for the remote. This time, Nora let her take it. Vanessa frantically pressed buttons until the screen went black, but the damage was done. Sandra stood frozen, staring at her daughter with an expression of horror and disgust. "Is this what you've become? After everything She couldn't finish, turning away as if the sight of Vanessa physically pained her. "Mom?" Vanessa pleaded. "It's not. I can explain." "I think we've all seen quite enough explanation," Robert said, his voice shaking with rage. He turned to Nora. "I'm sorry you had to experience this betrayal, but I'm not sorry you showed us who our daughter really is." "Dad," Vanessa cried. "Don't," he said sharply. "Don't call me that." "Not tonight." He took Sandra's arm. We're going home. Alone. The emphasis on the last word was unmistakable. Vanessa would not be welcome. As they moved toward the door, Sandra paused beside Nora. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for what they did to you, and for what we clearly failed to teach our daughter about loyalty and decency." After they left, a heavy silence fell over the room. Vanessa stood trembling, the remote still clutched in her hand. Derek remained seated, his head in his hands. "You had no right," Vanessa finally said, her voice raw. "No right to involve my parents?" Nora laughed, a brittle sound devoid of humor. "That's rich coming from you. You had no right to sleep with my husband. To lie to my face when I asked you directly if something was happening. To play the supportive friend while betraying me in the worst possible way." "It wasn't like that," Derek interjected, finally looking up. His face was ashen. "We didn't mean for this to happen." "Oh, I'm sure you didn't," Nora agreed, her voice dangerously calm again. "You didn't mean for me to find out. You didn't mean for there to be consequences. You just meant to keep fucking behind my back while smiling to my face." Vanessa flinched at the crude language, so unlike Nora's usual careful speech. "Nora, please. We need to talk about this like adults." "Like adults," Nora repeated incredulously. "Was it adult to dance naked for my husband in our home? Was it adult to lie to me when I specifically asked you if something was happening between you two?" "I was going to tell you," Vanessa insisted, tears still streaming down her face. "After the showcase next month, we were going to sit down together and what? Ask for my blessing? Explain how you two simply couldn't help yourselves, how your connection was just too powerful to deny." Nora's voice dripped with contempt. "Save it. I don't care about your excuses or your timeline." "This isn't just about us," Derek said, standing now. "It's about what happened between you and me long before Vanessa. The distance. The separate lives. You checked out of this marriage years ago, Nora. So that justifies betraying me with my best friend? If I wasn't giving you enough attention, the appropriate response was to talk to me about it. Or to leave. Not to sleep with Vanessa. I tried talking to you," Derek exclaimed, frustration evident in his voice. "Every time I brought up how disconnected we were, you changed the subject or blamed it on work stress. You didn't want to hear it. And I tried to suggest counseling just 2 weeks ago," Nora countered. "Your response was to shut down the conversation and walk away. Was that because you were already sleeping with her then? Is that why you didn't want to work on our marriage?" Derek's hesitation was answer enough. "How long?" Nora asked, the question directed at both of them. "How long has this been going on?" Vanessa and Derek exchanged a glance, a silent communication that only further confirmed the intimacy between them. 6 months, Vanessa finally admitted. "Since my birthday party." The timeline clicked into place in Nora's mind. Derek's sudden interest in cooking, Vanessa's increased presence in their lives, the subtle changes in his behavior that she'd dismissed or rationalized away. 6 months of lies, of betrayal, of making a fool of her while pretending to be her husband and her friend. "Get out," Nora said quietly. "Both of you, now." "Nora," Derek began, but she cut him off. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. Half of our savings has been moved to a separate account. You can stay at a hotel until we figure out what happens with the house." Her voice was clinical, detached. "I'll have the locks changed tomorrow." "You can't just throw me out of my own house," Derek protested. "Actually, I can. The deed is in my name, remember? My inheritance paid the down payment." It was a technical point. The mortgage was in both their names. But she knew Derek wouldn't challenge her on it. "Not tonight. This isn't fair," Vanessa said, her voice small. "What you did to my parents, they'll never forgive me now." "That sounds like a you problem," Nora replied coldly. "Maybe you should have thought about consequences before sleeping with your best friend's husband." "I love him," Vanessa said, a desperate edge to her voice. "And he loves me. It's not just some sordid affair. We have real feelings for each other." The declaration hung in the air between them, both a confession and a defense. Nora looked between them, seeing the truth of it in their expressions. the guilt mixed with defiance, the unspoken plea for understanding. "Then I wish you both all the happiness you deserve," Nora said, her voice steady despite the pain lancing through her chest. "Now get the fuck out of my house." 3 months later, the divorce was proceeding smoothly, all things considered. Derek hadn't contested Nora's claims or demands, perhaps out of guilt or perhaps simply wanting it over with as quickly as possible. They communicated only through lawyers now, the house on the market, their shared life being methodically dismantled and divided. Nora had thrown herself into her work, the pharmaceutical research that had always been her refuge. She'd moved into a sleek downtown apartment, minimalist and impersonal, but mercifully free of memories. She'd cut contact with their mutual friends, unable to face the pitying looks or curious questions. Some nights the loneliness was overwhelming, but it was preferable to the alternative, the false comfort of a marriage built on lies. She hadn't spoken to Vanessa since that night. She'd heard through acquaintances that the winter showcase had been canceled. That enrollment at the dance studio had dropped precipitously after Robert and Sandra had withdrawn their financial support and spread the story of their daughter's moral failings throughout their social circle. Nora tried not to feel satisfaction at this news and mostly failed. On a crisp December afternoon, Nora sat in a cafe near her new apartment, reviewing research data on her laptop. The place was busy with holiday shoppers seeking respite from the cold, the atmosphere festive with seasonal music and decorations. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the woman standing beside her table until a shadow fell across her screen. Nora. She looked up to find Sandra watching her with an uncertain expression. The older woman looked thinner than Nora remembered, her usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled, as if she'd dressed in a hurry. "Sandra," Nora said, genuinely surprised. "Would you like to sit?" Sandra hesitated, then nodded, taking the seat across from Nora. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me." "Why wouldn't I?" Nora asked, closing her laptop. "You didn't do anything wrong." "I'm her mother," Sandra said simply, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. They sat in silence for a moment, the holiday bustle of the cafe continuing around them. "How are you?" Sandra finally asked. "I'm surviving," Nora answered honestly. "Some days are better than others." "The divorce should be final after the new year." Sandra nodded. "And Derek and—" She couldn't bring herself to say her daughter's name. "I don't know," Nora said. "I don't ask, and no one volunteers the information." Another silence fell between them, heavier this time. "Have you spoken to her?" Nora asked, unable to help herself. Sandra's hands tightened around her purse. "Not directly. Robert refuses to have any contact. I've driven past the studio a few times. It looks closed most days now." Her voice caught. "Robert says I'm enabling her if I show any concern." "She's still your daughter," Nora said quietly. "Despite everything." "She betrayed you in the worst possible way," Sandra said, a hint of her former judgment returning. "After everything you did for her, for us." "Yes," Nora agreed. "She did, and I'm not sure I'll ever be able to forgive her for that." "Then why would you suggest I should?" Nora considered the question carefully. "Because I've learned something these past months, Sandra. Holding on to anger, nurturing it, letting it consume you, it doesn't punish the person who hurt you. It only continues to hurt you." "That sounds very enlightened," Sandra said, a touch of bitterness in her voice. "I'm not there yet." "Neither am I, most days," Nora admitted. "But I'm trying to get there. Not for her sake, but for mine." Sandra's eyes filled with tears. "I miss my daughter. Even after what she did, I miss her." "What kind of mother does that make me?" "A human one," Nora said gently. They talked for another hour. About grief, about betrayal, about the complicated love that remains even after trust is shattered. About how family doesn't stop being family just because they've hurt you deeply. About forgiveness as a process, not a single act of absolution. As they prepared to leave, Sandra hesitantly asked, Would it be terrible if I reached out to her? Not to condone what she did, but just to be her mother?" Nora finished for her. No, Sandra. I don't think that would be terrible at all. Sandra studied Nora's face. You're a remarkable woman, Nora Morgan. Better than most of us deserve. No. Nora shook her head. Just someone who's learned the hard way that life is too short to let other people's mistakes define you forever. After saying goodbye to Sandra, Nora walked through the city streets, holiday lights twinkling above her in the early dusk. She thought about the dinner that had changed everything. The calculated revenge that had brought momentary satisfaction, but no real healing. She thought about Derek and Vanessa, wondered briefly if they were happy together, or if the foundation of betrayal their relationship was built on had already begun to crack. Mostly, though she thought about herself, the woman she had been before discovering the betrayal, the woman she was becoming in its aftermath. The pain hadn't disappeared, might never completely fade, but it no longer defined her every waking moment. There were days now when she didn't think about them at all, when her life felt entirely her own again. As she reached her apartment building, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. It's Vanessa. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I'll respect that if you don't respond. But I wanted you to know that Derek and I broke up last month. The damage we caused was too much for us to build anything real on. I'm selling the studio and moving to Seattle. Before I go, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not because I expect forgiveness, but because you deserve to hear it. You were the best friend I ever had, and I destroyed that for something that wasn't worth it. I hope someday you find happiness again. You deserve that more than anyone I know. Nora stared at the message for a long time, a complex swirl of emotions rising and falling within her. Vindication, residual anger, a surprising flicker of compassion, even the faintest echo of the love she'd once felt for her friend. She didn't know if she would respond. Not tonight, at least. Maybe not ever. But for the first time, she could imagine a future where the betrayal was simply a chapter in her story, not its defining moment. Where she could look back on her marriage and friendship with clear eyes, acknowledging both the joy they had brought her and the pain of their ending, without either emotion overwhelming her. As she put her phone away and entered her building, Nora felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness exactly, but its distant cousin. A letting go, a stepping forward, a quiet recognition that while others had chosen to betray her, she could choose not to be defined by that betrayal. She could choose instead to be defined by what she did next. The audience had seen the show. Now it was time for her to leave the theater and step into the rest of her life.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.